112 operators of Reddit. What's the worst, saddest 112 call you got? Part 2? Please like and subscribe to support this channel. I worked at a call center. We had a few emergency lines for those that were in need of a priest. And a few for mental health. I was one of the only Spanish-speaking operators, and the presars we had at that time did not speak Spanish. Guy called BC. His wife had just given birth, but the baby had passed away. Word for word I was translating to the priest, but you could hear her anguished cries in the background, and that guy was barely holding on. She was asking why God would do this, and he wanted the priest to come and help pray for the baby. That was one of the most heartbreaking calls. They were so alone, and the only person who could understand him was some lady on the phone. I just asked someone who still works there if they offer mental health assistance for the workers. POS job still does not. I have a friend that is a firefighter, and his wife an operator. They were on the same shift that day, but their work building is quite far from each other. She answered a call from a suicidal woman that was claiming to set her own vehicle on fire with she inside it. My friend told his wife came traumatized that day because the woman was screaming in pain while burning inside the vehicle, and she couldn't do anything except deploy the firefighters. The women managed to give the location, but it was late. When his wife told him the story, he told her that he was one of the firefighters that had been deployed. He never told her the state of the women, she just knew she died, but he told me that he won't ever forget the smell of burned human flesh, and the fact that the women melted onto the driver's seat like she was the seat. This happened in Portugal, quite near where I live as well. I saw the dark smoke on the sky, half a kilometer away, but since I live next to a forest, I thought it was someone burning trash, as it happens a lot. Not an emergency service operator, but I worked for the retention department for a major cell phone company years ago. I got a call from this middle-aged sounding lady who told me she wanted to cancel her line entirely. For my job, I asked her why she wants to cancel, to try to offer solutions or to straight up bribe her into not canceling. And she said, "I'm dying soon and I won't need my cell phone in hospice." I had to reach out to my supervisor to get approval to cancel the line for account holder death, and he told me I had to warn her that she'd never be able to open another line with the company. She said, "That doesn't really matter anymore." I felt awful saying it and told her I was so sorry she was going through it. She started sobbing and said, "Me too. I don't want to die." I still remember how her voice was shuddering when she said it. It really broke my heart. We started talking while I was waiting for the supervisor to do his override. She talked about how she was trying to deal with loose ends as best as she could to make it easier on her daughter who had just had a baby. About how she was worried about her dog not adjusting, as he was a senior dog and he'd been with her since he was a puppy. She said she hoped it didn't hurt too much before she went. I let her talk until she didn't have anything else to say, and she thanked me at the end and said she was sorry if she burdened me. I told her it was okay, she deserved to be heard, and we said goodbye. I cried in the bathroom for about 20 minutes after we hung up. I work for 000 in Australia. Overall, I'm an absolute shit magnet, so I've got my fair share of horrible calls, but there's a couple of standouts. Talking a young dad through CPR on his 8-month-old child, that was the worst. The child had obvious ongoing health issues and sadly didn't make it, but I had to go on a bit of a walk after that one. The worst part was he started talking to a kid halfway through doing the CPR, and I got my hopes up that things weren't as serious as they first seemed. But it was just his other kid that had walked in and was trying to remain calm in front of sad face. The other was a young couple. The boyfriend came home to find she had committed suicide. Nothing out of the ordinary in the scheme of things, but I think as they were close to my age, that one hit home a little bit harder. There's lots of rewarding calls too, but sometimes the sad, horrible ones stick around. Previous 911 operator from North Dakota here in the US. I had a call from some frantic parents of children saying that the woman who was driving them, their aunt, was supposed to have driven them to school for their choir concert. Children were both under the age of 5. They said the kids were no-shows, and when they called the aunt to see where they were, the children answered crying and panicked. No idea where they were, but they said the driver fell asleep. We now know that she passed out from a diabetic blood sugar crash. The vehicle was still upright but off the road. Before the parents could walk the kids through calling 911, their phone died. Took over 40 minutes for Verizon to call back with a ping location. Children were in the car for over an hour with a dead woman, unable to do anything but wait. Kids were okay though, thankfully the wreck wasn't bad and the weather was warm. Posted this before. There are so many calls I remember, and so many that I don't. I've been a dispatcher for the RCMP for 14 years and honestly, you get so many bad and good calls that they all seem to blur together. I'm not allowed to give exact details, but one of my worst calls was from a little boy, I think he was 5. He was hiding in his closet because his dad was drunk and beating the ever-loving shit out of his mom. He lived in a very rural area, and it was about an hour drive from the nearest police detachment. I stayed on the phone with him for almost 45 minutes. The guys drive fast when there are kids involved, trying to keep him calm. You literally talk about anything that pops into your head. The weather, favorite TV shows, what his favorite toys are. All the while you can plainly hear a woman screaming and crying in the background, and as the calls goes on you can still hear the guy beating her, but her screams turn into grunts and moans. You can't tune it out, because you are constantly typing what you hear. Any details you can get from background noise is valuable to the officers attending. Anyway, the members arrived, arrested the piece of shit, and I hung up once they had the kids safe. And then the phone rang again. Because there is no stopping. There's no time to process what just happened, and honestly, it's probably for the best. A lot of the time you don't find out the outcome of the call because, as I said, there are always more phones ringing. The first year or so, there were calls that bothered me, but as the years went by I learned to compartmentalize. As soon as I hang up the phone now I'm done. Next call. But any calls involving children really gets to me still. I truly enjoy my job because I think that I am genuinely helping people, but I think this job is killing me slowly. I used to be the kindest, gentlest man you would ever meet, but now I find I am very easily angered and annoyed. One of my best calls involved a kid again. A 3-year-old was at a campground with her family and they let her out of their sight for 20 seconds and she wandered down to a creek and drowned. Her mom found her and her father called in. While I was getting details from the understandable distraught father, a random guy camping there was doing CPR managed to resuscitate her. I can't imagine how her parents felt, but it was like physical weight being lifted off of me. But this is kind of a loaded question for a dispatcher really. I told my worst and best memories, but there are so many strange, funny calls that I remember as well. And keep in mind, dispatchers tend to develop a fairly dark sense of humor. What some of us would find hilarious would probably shock a normal person. I've never personally gotten one, but I remember my friend's dad telling me this one. They received a call about an extremely distressed woman, who was claiming that her daughter was very sick and needed help. The woman was in tears and the hollering screams were just digging into him. So he sent medics while he stayed on call with her to calm her down. The only thing she told him was her address, nothing else. She wouldn't stop shouting that her daughter was sick and he was having trouble calming her. Everything he would say would just go through one ear and out the other. But she would occasionally stop shouting to tell her daughter, "It's okay baby, mama's here," and in between her shouts he could hear what sounded like someone coughing. She was screaming at him, telling him to hurry up and that her daughter was going to die. Eventually he got her to a calm state of mind and he was able to ease some things out of her, like her name, her daughter's name, and even what she meant when she said, "sick." The woman explained to him that her daughter was coughing and vomiting up blood. Her daughter was pale as a ghost and she couldn't move. He was just forced to listen to the horrified woman frantically calm her daughter down along with the horrific sounds of the daughter vomiting up blood. Once the police and medics arrived he got off the line. He said to this day that was the worst call he's ever taken and he couldn't imagine what mom was going through. He doesn't even know if the girl was okay with the amount of blood she'd lost while he was on call. But he said he prayed every night that she was. Truly a gruesome, gut-wrenching story. He quit after that, and rightfully so. A friend of mine took a 911 call from a guy who was terminally ill and sick of his quality of life. The man explained he was going to kill himself in this location and his name was this. He shot himself while on the phone with my friend. My friend tried to stop him and it was too late. The man had made up his mind. Law enforcement arrived and the man was obviously deceased. Very tough call for the dispatcher. I previously worked for 111, and we had a dad call up because his very young child had been feeling off color. For anyone that has used the 111 service, you already know that the person you're calling about absolutely must be awake for the call. Told dad that, and he tried to wake the kid up. Turns out he couldn't. I had to spend about 10 to 15 minutes coaching the bloke through CPR on the phone until an ambulance arrived. I have never felt anything even close to how I felt during and after that call. I never found out the outcome. I left not long after. Not a 911 or 112 operator, but have a feel-good story that fits. While chilling out one day, I got a text from a buddy to get on Discord VC right now because there was an emergency. Turns out one of our mutual gaming friends was in VC sobbing because his two brothers were the only family he had left and they had both just died in a car crash. He was letting us know he didn't want to live alone. From our casual conversations, I knew that I had actually been near his house to go fishing and he lived about 4 hours away from me. I told him that I was getting dressed and getting in my car to come spend the night. He said I wouldn't make it in time. I don't remember exactly what I said to him or how I worded it, but I was reminding him of simple things in life like fishing, gaming, friends, the gym, etc., are still there, and so is his gaming family. Shortly after, I heard an "I'm sorry" and a gunshot. Turns out at the last second he pulled the gun away and fired over his head. The next day he called me back to say that he misheard the sheriff. Both of his brothers are actually alive and well, and to say thank you for stopping him from making the stupidest decision of his life. And #X200B. My GF works as a dispatcher and I work for law enforcement, but we're in different counties. She had taken a call from a worried father who couldn't contact his son. The son was several states away from home and had been reported as a missing person. She talked to the dad for a while and filed the report, and that's the last she heard of it. Well, I was in a separate meeting and a trooper had reported they found a body and were headed out to handle that. While my GF and I were relaying our days to each other, I mentioned the body that had been found. After connecting the dots, we realized it was the son of the father she spoke to earlier in the week. So not a super traumatizing call, but the aftermath was rough for her. Maybe a bit off topic, but I was a 911 caller recently. Someone had broken into my car. I called the police non-emergency number, but they had a recording that it was the weekend, so they were closed. I then called 911. I was met with hold music. I was placed in the queue. If it were life or death, someone would have probably died before I actually got to talk to someone. If my friend were choking on food, he'd probably choke to death before they could walk me through the Heimlich. If someone were chasing me with a knife, I'd be stabbed before I could tell the authorities what was happening. It really drives home that you are solely responsible for your safety, and for the safety of those around you. Anything you can do to make yourself safer, any skills or gear you can acquire, and you make survival that much more likely. Firefighter here. When a dispatch sounds like it'll be challenging, we open the dispatch notes even if we weren't the one dispatched. Anything involving infants, babies, or children, they're the hardest. It's one thing to see an adult missing half their face, it's totally different when it's a kid. One call comes to mind. We weren't dispatched to this one but heard all the updates over the radio. A mother was sharing a bed with their baby. At some point in the night, the mother rolled over onto it. She smothered her own baby and didn't realize for a time. By the time the department got there, the baby was art. I was a 999 operator when I was 20 years old. It was my first proper job and I am now 22 and have since left. There are so many things that stick with you. I had a call from a dad who walked in to find his son hanging. He was so distressed, all he could do was apologize to me. He could not even remember the address as he was so shocked. He tried to cut him down but couldn't. The son's 6-year-old child was with him. I also had a call from a 16-year-old girl who had been told online that her boyfriend had just jumped off of a building and she wanted to know if this was true. She told me this name and I immediately knew it was him as the person sitting next to me had taken a call from someone at the scene. The distress in her voice was something I'll never forget. Not an operator, but a former FF, EMT. There are a couple of contenders, but I was thinking about this one last night. Years ago, climbed into a wreck of a car to stabilize a patient while my crew cut the car away around us. The patient was in bad shape. It had already been a bad shift. Multiple fires and serious wrecks. Moments before we'd gotten this dispatch, I'd spoken for my crew, in telling an officer who said he'd call in a crew to replace us that we weren't signing off. Being the person who sits in the car while it's cut is simple. You stay behind the patient, keep their neck straight and jaw open, and don't move. I was doing that, although I wasn't optimistic. Out of nowhere, the driver's speakerphone spoke up beside me, with the voice of a dispatcher I knew. The patient had apparently been conscious and lucid until seeing the lights of our engine arrive. Driver in opposing traffic had fallen asleep and plowed into her car. We waited to roll the dash off of the patient until the helicopter was ready to transport. The helicopter didn't transport. Hardest thing I was ever witness to was a dead baby. I was serving in corrections at the time. A drug addict came in and was admitted to the medical unit. Her body was so malnourished, they couldn't tell she was pregnant. She had the baby in the cell in the middle of the night. Had it right in the toilet. She hit the intercom system to let us know. The baby was born dead, I'm assuming because of whatever the mother had been using. She had no reaction, just handed it over like it didn't mean anything. No sorrow, no sadness, just acted like it was an inconvenience. It was absolutely infuriating. I'll never forget that night as long as I live. I'm late, so I'm sure no one will see this, but I'm going to list it anyways. A former coworker of mine was a first responder. Which I think is close enough. She had to respond to a house explosion. The story they got from the survivor, house was owned by an elderly couple. Says they woke up in the morning, his wife first. She shook him awake and told him she could smell gas very strongly. He got up to go outside and check their gas valves or something like that while she stayed inside. He got a ways out when the house exploded. The cause seemed to be that his wife went into the bathroom and flipped the light switch, which sparked their gas-saturated house. They got to the scene and the house was pretty much entirely gone, and the old man was in the rubble digging through it with his feet and hands burned and bleeding because he was trying to find her. They found a scorched black skeleton under the rubble afterwards, and that was all that was left of his wife. I am not a 112 operator, but my uncle is, and this is a story he told us. A little girl crying and saying that her dad was beating her mom. She was only 8 years old and yet she knew to call the authorities. At some point a man yelled, "What are you doing? Give me the phone," and she started screaming. By the time the police arrived, the mother and the daughter had been killed, and the father hanged himself. Just a PSA to anyone who may see this. If you know a 112 or 911 dispatcher, or an EMT, paramedic, or doc, or anything, don't ask them this. Unless they open the topic of conversation, don't ask them to relive some of the most difficult moments of their job. Some people are at peace with it, and that's fantastic. For many, it can be a source of PTSD and pain. Everyone in these jobs has seen shit they wish they hadn't. So unless they open that door for you, please don't ask.